For 105 days, Adolf Hitler lived underground while Berlin burned above him. What happened in those final hours in the Führerbunker has been pieced together from the testimony of the few who survived. As you imagine the scene, consider this: on January 16, 1945, Hitler had moved into the Führerbunker, a complex of underground rooms and tunnels beneath the Reich Chancellery, built 8.5 meters beneath the surface to protect him from Allied bombing raids. As the Soviet army closed in on Berlin, the city was in chaos, with over 100,000 civilians trapped and 40,000 German soldiers fighting a desperate last stand. By April 12, 1945, American forces had reached the Elbe River, just 100 kilometers west of Berlin, and the Soviet army had begun its final assault on the city, with 2.5 million troops, 6,250 tanks, and 40,000 artillery pieces. You might wonder, what was the psychological impact on Hitler of being surrounded by such overwhelming force, as the sound of artillery fire grew louder and the ground shook beneath his feet? The Führerbunker was equipped with its own generators, water supply, and air filtration system, but it was not designed to withstand a prolonged siege, and by April 20, 1945, Hitler's 56th birthday, the situation was becoming increasingly desperate. On April 22, 1945, Hitler suffered a nervous breakdown, realizing that his generals had misled him about the strength of the German army, and that all was lost, as General Gotthard Heinrich's Army Group Vistula was pushed back by the Soviet army. By April 25, 1945, Soviet troops had encircled Berlin, cutting off all escape routes, and the next day, Hitler ordered the execution of Hermann Fegelein, his SS liaison officer, for desertion, a sign of the growing paranoia and desperation in the bunker. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun in a small ceremony in the Führerbunker, with Joseph Goebbels and Martin Bormann as witnesses, and later that day, he dictated his final testament, naming Admiral Karl Donitz as his successor. You might ask, what was going through Hitler's mind as he prepared to take his own life, knowing that his regime was about to collapse? The next morning, April 30, 1945, Hitler held his last military conference, where he was told that the Soviet army was just a few hundred meters away, and at 3:30 p.m., he and Eva Braun took cyanide capsules in the bunker's study, while the sounds of gunfire and explosions grew louder outside. The bodies were then burned in the Reich Chancellery garden, along with those of Joseph and Magda Goebbels, who had also taken their own lives, and the remains were buried in a shallow grave. As the news of Hitler's death spread, the remaining Nazi leadership began to collapse, with Admiral Karl Donitz, now the new Führer, ordering a final resistance, but it was too late, and on May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allied powers, with General Alfred Jodl signing the surrender documents at the Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force in Reims, France. You might consider, how did the confirmation of Hitler's death affect the morale of the German people, who had been told for so long that their leader was invincible? The Soviet forensic investigation, led by Colonel Boris Potsarov, confirmed Hitler's death on May 11, 1945, after examining the dental records and other evidence, and the news was announced to the world, marking the end of the Nazi regime and the beginning of a new era in Germany. As you reflect on these events, remember that on June 21, 1945, the Soviet Union announced that Hitler's body had been identified, and the world could finally begin to come to terms with the enormity of the atrocities committed by the Nazi regime. And you might ask, what lessons can we learn from the darker aspects of human history, and how can we ensure that such atrocities are never repeated?